Hey YouTube, it's Jesus here, and we're going to play some Hearthstone, so let's get into it. So I have hit rank 816 Legend using my Fatigue Druid deck. I probably would be a lot higher, but I ended up taking quite a bit of break before I finished my climb. I think I waited like 2 or 3 days before I was able to play again, and this number is just going to keep going down. I don't know if you've ever tried to actually reach rank 1 Legend, but it's very hard because you have to play a lot of games, and you have to have a high win rate. I've noticed that my Hearthstone replay actually did not record the number of games or the win rate with this deck. I would estimate my win rate was probably a good 68%. It was definitely well over, the 51% necessary to win. That's kind of explains why my position is, fairly good. I'm going to go ahead and go into depth with this deck. So this video is going to get pretty long. But I do think it'll be worth it because, not only am I going to be explaining, the various decks that you'll encounter in the wild format that just kind of control the meta, but I'm really going to go into detail how to kind of beat the meta with this truly a meta breaker type of deck. I feel like this does break into the meta quite a bit. It's a great anti-deck. It's solid to play. It's pretty fun, and hopefully by listening to the video, ultimately it would be to hopefully give you some better insight and some better consistency in your games. So hopefully you can hit Legend as well. If you have a good experience with this deck, please drop me a comment and let me know if my video helped you improve your game, and if you enjoyed this deck, and if you would like to see more in-depth deck explanations. Sorry, I have a hard time saying that word. Alright, so we're going to go and break the deck down. So I have Aquatic Form. I feel like pretty much every Fatigue Druid deck setup is going to run this card. It is a great card to search out cards that we need. So here's a little bit of a tip with this card. Even though you could use this card on turn 1, we know a lot of our targets are going to be higher than that. I would not waste your Aquatic Form. I would not play this with the hopes of, maybe I'll get a Neutralize. Maybe I'll turn into like an early biology project to try to ramp up, which is normally not a good idea. We'll kind of get into that as to why. But you really don't want to waste this card. I would wait until you have about 3 mana. Once you have about 3 mana, you'll have plenty of targets you can pull. Obviously, use Aquatic Form if you need to, even if you've burned your mana and now you don't have enough, because this is not based on do you have the total amount to play it. It's based on if you have currently the mana to play it. So if you had 10 mana, you burn all your mana, you only have like 2 left, and you want to pull a 4-cost card, it's not going to give you that 4-cost card for next turn. You'll have to actually draw it the next turn. So this is going to slow down your game. So don't waste this guy. Biology Project. So this is like a double-edged sword because it's also going to give your opponent 2 mana crystals. I would never use this in a typical matchup because you'll be going against several decks that are probably going to benefit from Biology Project more than you will. That's not to say that you can't benefit from having the extra mana faster, but if you are going against a very aggressive deck or a big deck, either way, they are going to benefit having a faster ramp than you are. You're just not going to be able to keep up. So what I typically will do is I will kind of pocket this, and then if I know for sure I have Poison Seed, and I have a Spreading Plague, or I have, the Capture the Coldtooth Mine, which can consistently give me Spreading Plague, or consistently give me Aquatic Form to try to search something else I might need, like a Naturalize, I'm 100% going to play this Biology Project because then you are baiting your opponent. They're going to say, wow, I have all this extra mana now, let me drop some minions, let me go ahead and go in, because they're not really going to be for sure what your game plan is, because there's several Druid decks that you could possibly be playing as. I know there's some that kind of utilize that one-turn kill setup, like Mechathon Druid. So they might be like, oh, this guy's a Mechathon, or oh, this guy's gonna try to use a more standard Fatigue deck, because this deck is actually different than what I would say a lot of people play. I would like to think my deck is fairly creative. Hearthstone Replay doesn't even have a lot of data on this particular deck. So this is not one a lot of people play. Although it does borrow the same idea, obviously, and I'm not going to say somebody hasn't played a similar deck. I'm not saying that at all. I feel like at this point, every deck that could possibly exist has happened in Hearthstone at least once. So that's kind of my thoughts on Biology Project. Of course, you're going to have two of those. Now, Floop's Glorious Gloop is just amazing. So this card has so many different uses because what you could do is you could play this into a Poison Seed. Odds are, when you Poison Seed, just because the state of the meta, you're going against like Pirate Rogue. You're going against Pirate Priest. It's also very aggressive. You're going against even Shaman. You're going against Pirate Warrior, or you're going against the more popular aggro Druid, or even potentially a Warlock that's maybe a Pain Lock or something that has now dropped a whole bunch of 8/8s on the board. Point being, odds are you are going to have more than 4 minions on the board. So you're going to get all your mana back from using Poison Seed, plus some extra, and it's going to wipe his board down to just those 2/2 treants. Now, word of caution, if you are going against an even Death Knight, if he is an unholy Death Knight, which he 100% will be if he is going even, he is going to have a way to buff those treants because now you have given him a plethora of corpses, and he will likely get lethal on you because he's going to have a full board of 5/5s. That's going to be 35 damage to your face, and there's going to be nothing you can do about it unless you have the armor. Do not ever think that he doesn't have that in his hand, because odds are he has that card. So the other card here is Jade Idol. Jade Idol is one of those cards that's just going to help us not fatigue ourselves. It is very vital. If you're playing against a secret mage, you don't want to accidentally blow your Jade Idol and it get counterspelled, or you're going to have a very bad time. There's really not much to say about Jade Idol. If you've played this game anytime at all, you are familiar with this card. It's kind of been a staple in a lot of these, control, fatigue, whatever setups with Druid, because you can just keep spamming these Jade Idols and you'll just go on and on and on forever. Now we have Naturalize, which is going to destroy a minion, and then your opponent draws 2 cards. This is going to help fatigue your opponent faster. This makes games a little faster. Even though you could Solar Eclipse into Naturalize, I normally save my Solar Eclipse for either Moonlight or Due Process, or occasionally I might use Solar Eclipse in order to get a Spreading Plague early by doing Solar Eclipse into Gloop and then maybe into Poison Seed. That way I get a whole bunch of treants, and then I combo that by giving myself a whole bunch of taunts. Or I might use it to get me some extra armor with Feral Rage or Branching Paths. Or even Ferocious Howl. I've actually survived a game by doing Solar Eclipse and a Ferocious Howl because I didn't have anything else, and that helped me draw into the cards that I need. Actually helped me draw into a Spreading Plague, and we ended up winning that game. So, you don't want to necessarily use Solar Eclipse on this, although, it could be great to finish, the game off. Capture the Coldtooth Mine is pretty much in the deck for one purpose and one purpose only. Guarantees you Spreading Plague. Odds are you're going against an aggressive deck, you are going to want Spreading Plague. The other option that you might want to pull is it could maybe help you get your Floop, possibly your Naturalize, your Biology Project, if you haven't already drawn your Aquatic Forms. But odds are you'll either get an Aquatic Form or a Spreading Plague, and both of those are great. And kind of depending on where you're at in the game, you'll kind of know which one you want to play. I mean, either you're going to be saving this because you're going against an aggressive deck, or you might save Aquatic Form to bait out a counter spell, or to search your deck for a card you're looking for that's not Spreading Plague. Maybe you're trying to find Wildheart, and maybe Wildheart's hanging out at the bottom of your deck. That's the other thing to kind of note. So Aquatic Form is, obviously the dredge effect. So that's the bottom 3 cards of your deck. So don't waste these. Don't do like Aquatic Form, draw a card out, do Aquatic Form again, because 2 of your picks are going to be the same as they were last time. So, that's kind of the other thing to keep in mind. And honestly, once you've used Aquatic Form once, you know what's at the bottom of your deck. Like, unless you shuffled cards in, you know what's at the bottom of your deck. So you really can then use that to your advantage, because then you might know for sure Wildheart is at the bottom of my deck. So I know the next time I use Aquatic Form, I'm going to go with Wildheart. Like, you know that, and you can guarantee that 100% of the time. And I think that's a concept of dredge that people often forget. And if you're playing with a deck tracker, which you can get one from like Hearthstone Replay, if you do not already have a deck tracker, which I thought I had mine pulled up, I'm going to go ahead and pull mine up right now. The deck tracker will actually keep track of cards that are in the bottom of your deck. So if you are not already running something like this, and you don't have to run this exact one, but this is awesome. So I already have this deck loaded in there. It kind of gives you your different spreads and stuff. Now, it doesn't have any data, which is strange because I always thought it would collect data, but I was playing on my phone, so that could be why. Then I have plating in here. So the reason for plating, it's just it's a 2-cost card. It's 4 armor later. It's a great little pinch that might keep you alive. That's kind of why it's included. It doesn't do anything amazing, but for some of those really aggressive games, if I haven't drawn into anything, this works out to 8 effective health. And for 2 mana, 8 health, that's really good. If you think about, our heal for 3 mana, this is exactly that, except it's only 2 mana. So I feel like that's a lot of value. I don't feel like you could argue against the value of this card, even though we're not getting it all up front. Due Process is absolutely amazing. It is what enables this deck. And you don't always have to combo Due Process with Solar Eclipse. That's not always the case. Because if you're going against an aggressive deck, odds are they are going to be able to play cards just as fast as you. And you could actually end up, hurting yourself if you play this too early and you don't have a means of, counteracting it. But most games, what happens is your opponent's very aggressive. They have nothing that's going to necessarily clear the field because they don't want to clear the field. They want to just be aggressive. And they also have a lot of cards that are going to be drawing anyway. So the idea is you use Due Process, use Biology Project. It's going to help your opponent commit to the board, and once they're fully committed, you're going to end up being able to poison seed them quickly because you will be drawing extra cards as well. You'll draw into your poison seed. Now your opponent has 7 trees on his field, and those treants are not doing anything for your opponent. Yes, that's still 14 to face, but either way, you should be able to have the armor and stuff to keep up with that, unless you're going against an unholy Death Knight, then they'll be able to burst you down, or maybe even an aggro Druid would be able to burst you down. But for the most part, you'll be okay, because even Shaman, isn't going to have a lot of stuff that's going to buff his minions outside of totems, and so you almost lock their board down where they can't really act or do anything. That's probably one of the best ways to stall out a big priest. The only thing is a big priest does have some board clears, at least enough to deal with 2-cost cards. So what he'll do is he'll do his 2 mana, deal 1 damage to everything spell that also life steals. I'm terrible with names, but it's a pretty staple shadow spell. He'll do that, and that's going to allow him to clear his board, and then he can drop his big minions. Alright, so we have Moonlight Guidance. Moonlight Guidance, I typically want to target either a Due Process, maybe I'll target a Spreading Plague, but that's very rare because for the most part 2 is going to be sufficient unless I just don't have one in my hand and I need one. You never want to target Wildheart, it's just not worth doing that. Poison Seed is a decent target, depending on what you're going against. Branching Path is okay. Probably what I typically will target, because I'll try to use Moonlight when I already have about 5-6 mana. I'm going to target things like Ferocious Howl or Biology Project. That's going to give me huge value the same turn I play it. Solar Eclipse, same kind of concept. We've already kind of talked about some targets. Feral Rage, you might want to target with that, or you might want to try to get a whole bunch of mana. Furious Howl, whatever your target is, you really can't go too wrong with it. Moonlight and Solar Eclipse is pretty decent too. If you don't have any of your Due Processes drawn or any of your Biology Projects drawn, and you have Wildheart and you have the mana, you might try to throw into that, and hopefully you get some pretty good picks. But I'd say for the most part, you're going to use this with due process. Ferocious Howl for the armor and the draw. Now I actually include Fungal in here. I include 2 of them because we have no minions in this deck. You get to draw 3 cards, and we're screwed if we don't have Jade Idol anyway. I mean, if someone gets rid of our Jade Idol, it's over. That actually did not happen to me at all the entire probably 50-something games I played. It's just not really an issue with this deck. So with the Fungal Fortunes, you're drawing 3 cards. That's going to help us draw into what we need. Branching Path for the sustainability, but also an important thing to note when playing Branching Paths is you have the option to choose to give your minions 1 attack. So sometimes what I'll do, depending on the deck I'm going against, sometimes like, Pirate Rogue or someone that has like actually quite a bit of difficulty clearing out Spreading Plague, I'll actually save back a Solar Eclipse, and then if I have 5, at least 5 of these guys on the field, sometimes you're going to have 6, you pop Solar Eclipse, and then you'll pop Branching Paths. Now I'm giving all my minions 4 armor. Now you have a board of 5/5s, and you can get lethal. So, I mean, there's been a few games I've actually won with Branching Paths. Thing to note with Poison Seed, it's not going to stop Big Priest completely because a lot of their cards is drawing from their deck. They also have the ability to actually pick cards that have died. They have the ability to summon different cards that have died. So Poison Seed really doesn't break their game like it used to. You really want to try to focus on getting their board full of Trents. And you want to save, enough to where, you are able to target those Tide Hunters. You don't so much care about the hands, you care about the Tide Hunters. If Tide Hunter stays more than 1 turn, and you don't have anything to block with, he'll probably get lethal. Probably the best thing that's going to save you against Big Priest is going to be Due Process, because, their deck's a little bit slower, and eventually they'll draw all their minions, because they only have the 3 minions typically, and so once those are drawn, they're less of a threat, especially if that's played from hand. Wildheart, because 20 mana is awesome, 5 armor you draw, and then you have a far superior hero power. And then Spreading Plague, we've already kind of talked about that into nauseam. But with the Jade Idol and Wildheart, that does help you draw into an extra Jade, so it works super well. So that is probably too deep of an overview of this deck. Now I'm just going to kind of talk about each of the decks you'll probably be going against and kind of how to deal with them. So first, let's talk about Priest. So in Wild, it's been my experience, you're either going to see a Big Priest, which is pretty common. You'll see like a Reno Shadow Priest, or you'll also see a Shadow Priest that kind of utilizes pirates, and they're going to face, they're going Shadow Blast. They use Void Touch to really hurt you. It is a very, very aggressive deck. I would think of those 3, you're probably going to see the Reno Shadow Priest variant most often, then probably followed by Big Priest, and then closely followed by the Pirate Void Touch variant. I would say the good news is on each of those decks, you kind of want to hold the same thing. You want to prioritize keeping a Poison Seed. If you have a Naturalize, that's a pretty decent one to keep. You want to get a Due Process pretty early in those. And I would say, if you have a Spreading Plague, go ahead and toss it back. You don't really need to hold a Spreading Plague probably ever. Just because odds are you'll draw into it by the time you have 6 mana, and it would just kind of be a dead card in your hand. Now, they're probably, I would say that Priest is a pretty hard matchup. With Big Priest, the thing you have to be really careful of is he'll wait until you're Spreading Plagues down, and then he'll act like he has no plays, and then he'll bait you and silence all of your plagues, all of your taunts, and then he'll go face and win. So you do have to keep in mind he's running 2 silences in his deck that'll silence all your enemies more than likely, so just be aware of that silence. Other than that, you pretty much armor up Plague Spread when he's got a full board of Treants. You don't want to Poison Seed until he has a full board, and odds are he's going to get a full board. It's okay to take a Cthulhu to the face, a Gahoon to the face. That's only 8 damage. You know, even if he has like one that's 8, one that's a 5/5 down, that's still, you know, what would that be? That'd be 8, be about 13 damage. So, you know, that's not too bad. And then I had a brain fart there. And then, you know, that's pretty much how you'll beat him. I'd say win rate against Priest is pretty good as long as you're mindful of that silence on Big Priest. The only issue is if you're playing the pirate variant that uses Void Touch and the Shadow Blasts. You know, it is just such an aggressive deck. It's very possible he'll get lethal if you don't draw into the cards you need pretty quick to armor up and to kind of defend against him. So that's actually a pretty hard matchup. That kind of will bring us into Death Knight. With Death Knight, I think probably the most common ones that I see, probably the most common one now, is an even Unholy Death Knight. I would have said before it would have been a like Reno Rinthal Blood Death Knight, and then probably the least I actually was seeing was a Frost Death Knight. I just was not seeing Frost Death Knight very much. I think that's more of a standard deck, not so much a wild deck. So with Unholy, that's a pretty tough matchup. I feel like you can consistently win, but again, just be mindful. When you Poison Seed him, he is still quite deadly. You don't want to Poison Seed unless you can also spread the Plague. You want to focus more on armoring up. You don't want to necessarily Poison Seed until you either have a lot of armor or you can follow it up with that Spreading Plague. I mean, I would just assume, you know, he's got the cards that he needs to buff his minions, and, you know, with Spreading Plague, that's typically going to generate him at least 5 corpses. So you just want to be really mindful of the corpses he has and kind of, you know, where you're at on that positioning. So not to say you might sometimes have to use Poison Seed because he can get quite a bit of damage down early anyway, even without that. And so then you kind of have a choice to make, and you just hope for the best. And in that case, you know, he might end up coming back and winning. But, you know, either way, with the Blood Death Knight, honestly, it's a control deck. And I'm gonna go ahead and just pop on and talk about Control Warrior 2. Both of those decks, you are going to have a very high win rate. Those are easy games for you. They are just slow by nature. They don't really have a whole lot of things to deal with you. The only thing is they will run the 6-drop neutral that lets you steal a card from your opponent's hand. Let me actually get you guys the name of it because I'm terrible with names. Yes, so you have the Mad Duke. So it's discover a card at each player's hand and swap them. This card could definitely steal your Jade. That's probably going to be your main issue. I mean, if you're going against Control Warrior, they will sometimes run their 5-drop that makes your opponent discard a random spell. Even with that, you have a full hand, so these are not going to be super consistent. And I will say I see Theodore the Mad Duke less often than I have been seeing him. He is just a dead drop, really, if you don't have like a reason. Like if you're not going for a really specific card, and it's like there's just not a whole lot of value there. I mean, the Mad Duke's is one of those cards where it's like when it works, it has almost infinite value, but when it doesn't, I mean, it's a 4/4 drop for 6. And you're still having to give a card to your opponent, so your opponent's not necessarily losing card advantage. So, I don't know, it's just not, to me, a super impressive card. And I think people will argue that it is, and it certainly can be. But those are the types of things you'd have to look out for in both of those controlled decks. Outside of that, though, you should be pretty golden. As far as the other warrior variant, you know, I feel like Pirate Warrior, you really don't see Pirate Warrior in Wild very much, not at this level. That's more lower ranks. Once you hit Diamond 5, Warrior pretty much goes away. I would say Demon Hunter even kind of disappears as well. You really just don't see a lot of them. You see a lot of Unholy Death Knights, you see a lot of Pirate Rogue, which Pirate Rogue is also a pretty easy matchup for you. Sometimes they can get their cannons down and just get a lot of early aggression you can't catch up from. But for the most part, they're going to get you down pretty low, but as soon as you get your first Spreading Plague off, it's over and you've won, because they can't deal with Spreading Plague very well. Very seldom do they break through one, let alone two Spreading Plagues. Now with Even Death Knight, I feel like that's probably one of your harder matchups. But the strategy is kind of the same on those. Now Even Shaman, Even Shaman's another one of those that I feel can definitely overwhelm you. But with them, we can do an early Poison Seed, because we don't have to worry about them having buffs like we do like with Aggro Druid or with the Unholy Death Knight. Even Shaman's not going to have those buffs. They're not going to be able to buff those Trents. They're only able to buff totems, and their whole deck revolves around totems. So odds are we're going to be pretty safe there. We just have to make sure we can survive, a hit from each of the Trents, but odds are we will. Some of the other decks you might go against would be like Secret Mage. So I noticed something with Mage as I was playing. Probably my last 15 games, I only saw maybe one Secret Mage, which is unusual. Secret Mage was dominating, I think, the meta. Like, a lot of people played Secret Mage. Now I'm seeing more Quest Mage, and I think Quest Mage made a comeback because they ended up buffing some of the components of that deck. It makes it work more consistently. It was always able to get quests pretty fast, but now it's just a little bit faster. The thing with Quest Mage is, once they get their quest, you're done. I mean, they're going to keep time warping. But the important thing to remember is this. If a Quest Mage gets another turn, it treats it as a fresh turn for them. In other words, an easy win against Quest Mage is Solar Eclipse into Due Process. If you do that a couple of times, even if we have like 3 Due Processes effects going on, 3 extra cards a turn, their draw power, they draw so much, and by the time they are able to pop their quest, and they keep giving those infinite turns, we're gonna have enough armor, because they don't really have a lot of things that's gonna be doing damage because they're focused on getting their quest. So we're going to have enough armor, we're going to be able to last a while. And yeah, they might have endless turns, but odds are they will die before we do. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Warlock. Warlock is kind of a similar concept, almost, but a little bit different. So right now the most popular Warlocks are Discard Warlock and Painlock. So Painlock, you're using cards that's going to be hurting you, but you're going to have huge value from it. It normally runs a 40 card variant. This deck is super good. I would say it's probably the more consistent of the two, but the thing with Discard Warlock is it's so fast and it does so much damage. It's the preferred deck for Warlock right now in Wild. Even after all the nerfs, it's still pretty insane. The thing with Discard Warlock is you're going to have to buff armor pretty much this whole time. I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about the Due Process unless you're just trying to get some card draw yourself. I would be way more focused on just armoring up, because he's going to end up getting his imps on the ground, and then what is ultimately going to happen is he gets his imps on the ground. You're going to go ahead and pop your plague spread, your spreading plague, and he's going to drop Cataclysm. And at this point, his deck's going to be almost depleted anyway. He's probably going to have a full hand. So even though he'll almost have lethal on you, he's got now 2 imps that's drawing a ton of cards for him. And that's going to end up getting you lethal, because he's going to end up drawing too much. So that's kind of in a nutshell how you play this deck. I think I've pretty much touched on all of the main decks that you'll encounter. You really don't see a lot of Hunter at this level, which is disappointing. So yeah, and like with Paladin, there is one deck you might occasionally see, and that's like a calls to arm variant that use buffs and divine minions ultimately to buff up your Wind Fury minion.